Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate, the show that inspires each of us to see how we have the power to make a difference all around us. Each episode highlights an individual doing good in the world while following their passions, good for their own souls and for others. I get so excited about sharing each and every episode of Be the Good with you, and I hope you enjoy these people and stories. If you're new here, welcome, and if you are returning, thank you so much for your support. I'm so glad you found Be the Good with Kate and would love to hear from you. If you're finding value in these episodes, I invite you to share with someone who could also use this dose of good news, or tag me on social with your favorite quote from the episode. Every share, subscriber, review, and comment helps me to share these guests' wonderful work to more people. Thank you for your help in this. Now, on to this week's episode. Let's spread a little more goodness in the world.
Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate. Today's guest is Sofie Lindberg, and I am loving the name of her podcast. She is the host and producer of Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy, the Empowerment Podcast. And that is just one aspect of many of her life. I'm going to let her tell you the rest. But first of all, Sofie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. And please tell everybody a bit more about who you are and what you do in your own words.
Absolutely. So thank you for plugging the podcast. I am the host and producer of Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy, which is a new passion project. I'm also a full-time student. I study human services and organizational sciences. It's a fancy word for nonprofit management. I am also an avid fencer, and I hold two jobs. So one is I'm a nonprofit associate at a local nonprofit called Fair Chance, which does capacity building for other nonprofits. And I am the director of programs for my university's Office of Sustainability.
Excellent. It's so rare that I come across someone else with that similar major. When I was in college, I was an arts administration major, which was also a very variable on a way of saying nonprofit management, right? This one just happened to be an arts focus. So I love that George Washington offers this and that you found it. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you picked this path to go into?
Absolutely. So I initially was, that kid that wanted to be the next president. Eventually it shifted to, I want to be a diplomat. And I initially entered university as an international affairs major. And I grew up around a lot of different cultures. I went to international boarding school for high school. And that's really where that inspiration stemmed from to pursue a career in international affairs. And so I got to university, started my first job at Fair Chance, which is my current position as a nonprofit associate. Started that work in conjunction with my freshman year. And after my very first intro class to international affairs, I said, absolutely not. This is not for me. I can't do this. And I knew that I wanted to make a difference in the world. I just was not a fan of all of the red tape that comes with international affairs, especially from a diplomacy and State Department perspective. And after working with Fair Chance for a little bit over a year, I really started expanding into, okay, all right, this is a field. I can work as in the nonprofit sector. I can actually do that. Okay, what are my interests in the nonprofit sector? What do I want to pursue? Do I want to do maybe working with education nonprofits or gender equity nonprofits or which area? And so that's something that I've really explored over the years, is figuring out, where I fit into that niche. And thank goodness I live in Washington, D.C., because there's so many nonprofit opportunities here. But it was definitely a journey to figure out where I fit, at least career-wise, but also where I want to make my difference in the world. And so I'm pursuing future opportunities and eventually starting my own nonprofit that will teach English to speakers of foreign languages for free. So that's something that I'm trying to work on now, but definitely involved in the education sector later on with my nonprofit work.
That's fantastic. And all of this, and I think you're one of the youngest, if not the youngest guests that have been on the podcast. So that is so just invigorating and inspiring that no matter how old you are, whether it's early in the stage of life or later, you can just dive in full force. And I love that you've already found the nonprofit world. I feel like, at least historically, that was kind of something people fell into later on, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
you found it already, which is wonderful, because we need people that really have that business and nonprofit in background and information starting in on the ground floor. And why did you want to create your own nonprofit in addition to working in the sector as a whole?
Absolutely. So I think that, I've always seen myself as somebody that wants to build something. And that's something that I learned, I think, from when I was probably 6 years old, that I knew I never wanted to work for somebody else's dream. I wanted to make my own a reality. And I mean, of course, right now, that's not always possible to do. There's time constraints. So that's kind of why I have a passion project, is because I wanted to make something that I had been thinking about for a while a reality. And after working in the nonprofit sector for, I think, a little over a year and a half now, and then I did, volunteer work in high school, but being an actual employee. And so I saw the interworkings of how they run, right? And I started to look at it, and I started to think about it, and I was like, actually, this is doable. It's not as hard as everybody thinks it is to start a nonprofit. And being at university, I've met a couple of students who are in their final year here and already have a nonprofit. And so it's something where it's like, wow, wait, you're 20 years old and you have a nonprofit? Wait, I can do that? Okay, this is doable. And especially after studying their makeup, and where I work right now helps build up financial management systems and human resource systems of other nonprofits. And so listening to some of those conversations, that really sparked that interest for me to want to start my own, because I kind of had that behind the curtain look into how other nonprofits are running and some of the common areas that people need to work on. And so I wanted to connect that experience to my time in high school, where I was the only native English speaker at my high school. And so that was a blessing and a curse at the same time, being in that environment where you had a very high standard to live up to. But also, I always enjoyed speaking with other students, and maybe it's reading a paper for them, or it's helping them with a project or something like that. And so I would get asked questions all the time about English. And so I loved it. I was very happy to do it. And so, going down the line, I really want to combine my present with my past and everything that I've learned from that experience.
Amazing. So going with the past for a moment, because we talked about this right before we hit record, tell everybody kind of about your past and where you grew up versus your family, and just it's a very unique mix and I love it. So please.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Florida. I was actually born in a really small town called Fernandina Beach. It's a very big kind of tourist beach destination spot, but not really that well known. And I went to school there all throughout middle school. And then the Parkland shooting happened. And it freaked me out. It freaked my parents out. And so we said, okay, we need to get out of here. And when I was 13, I moved to Vancouver, Canada without my parents to go to an international boarding school. And I was there all the way up until graduation. My father is a Swedish citizen. And so I actually just got my Swedish citizenship about a year ago. And so I always had his influence growing up. And my mother is actually Polish American. So that was a big influence growing up. And then throwing a technically Southern kid, but with a European parent and then a kind of European parent throwing me into Canada was a very interesting experience, to say the least. But it stuck with me. And so now I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm back in the States. But I definitely feel like I've kind of been from all over. I travel a lot. And so I always go on a mother-daughter trip to, usually we go somewhere in Europe, but we go every single year and we'll spend about a month there. And so I've grown up around so many different cultures, and it's definitely influenced, this English speaking nonprofit idea, but also who I am now and who I interact with. And so, yeah, it's been a very interesting upbringing.
Oh, very much so. And now, throughout, whether it's from the past or the present, I love to ask about good news moments. And maybe this has happened through your podcast, which we'll get more into as well. Maybe it's through the Fair Chance organization you work with now. Any examples of the work that you've been doing that's been helping others that you've been able to experience for yourself or for others, those moments of those positive vibes, so to speak?
Absolutely. So two that come to mind, one is podcast and the other is through Fair Chance work. And I'll start there. And I had the pleasure of attending. We have a graduation ceremony at the end of each partnership we do. We partner with 3 different organizations for about a year. And basically we help them build their nonprofits. And so we focus on organizations that serve impoverished children, youth, and families. And part of this graduation ceremony is they talk about how this program has helped them and how they've seen results in the children that they serve. And I remember being in this graduation ceremony and being able to be a part of an environment where there's someone saying that I just had a child come to me and say that they are so happy when they come to my programming, and this programming would not be able to exist if I didn't partner with Fair Chance, because we would have had to shut down and close down shop because we couldn't afford to keep things open. And so having a child come up to me and say, this programming has changed my life. Thank you so much. I always enjoy coming in to the community center. I always enjoy doing, I think it was drum classes, if I'm not mistaken, that this programming was, and doing drum classes. And being able to hear one of our partners talk about that experience really made me, or it solidified that I'm in the right sector. To be able to be a part of an environment where truly every single day somebody's life is changed by the nonprofit sector and by the programs and services that these different organizations provide. And that was, it brought tears to my eyes being a part of that conversation and seeing really how underserved so many populations are. But seeing that people can make a difference. It is 100% possible. And I'm happy that the sector is slowly growing, and we're getting more people into the sector, especially people from my generation are really involved in nonprofit work. And so I'm excited to see how many more lives we can change from that. And then bringing it towards podcasting moments. I remember my first episode had come out, and it was called Starting the Journey. And it was just kind of touching on a lot. And there was an analogy I had made, and it was that don't let the bad apple ruin the fridge. And I had basically compared that sometimes we have bad apples in our life that are rotting up the fridge, AKA us. And sometimes we need to release those people from our life because they aren't serving where we're going. Rather, they are pulling us back. And I remember a couple people had reached out to me afterwards, and one of them had confided in me about a very toxic relationship and how that analogy let her see it for what it really was. And I think that that's something that I very much relate to. And so I felt for her, and I thought about my own experience, and I was like, yeah, actually, I've been in a toxic relationship. I've been in an emotionally abusive relationship, and I didn't realize it either, until I broke it down with, wow, they were a rotting apple. And so that really touched me when she said that to me. And so now every time I post an episode, she always writes me and she says, oh my gosh, I love your new episode. Thank you so much. It's giving me girl boss energy. It makes me feel so empowered. And so that's kind of what I've taken away from my podcast, is even if one person listens, I'm okay with that, because one person has listened and they've already changed their life and already are feeling more themselves. And so that's something else that really is a good news story and makes me feel good.
Absolutely. Yes, it is that one person, if you can help one person. And the other thing that you didn't mention directly, but you totally said in those last two stories, is the idea too of a reminder that always say thank you to someone if they've made a difference. Because I think a lot of times, and you definitely see this in the nonprofit sector, it's that quote unquote thankless work sometimes, when it can get very tiring and underpaid or not paid at all. And you're constantly working to help others, but then it's like, oh, am I really doing anything? Is something coming out of this? That can happen. I've heard stories of that happening. But like you said, that one boy who came up to you to said, this made such a difference in my life, and you've remembered that, and it's meant so much to you. So I also think that's a good reminder, right, for all of us to just, it always is worth it to say thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's something that, if anything, people should take away, is that really a thank you can make someone's day. I mean, it's something that we remember, and I will remember this for a very long time, is just having someone say thank you. And so even if it's, someone holding the door open for you, or someone, or just, or honestly, if you just love someone's work and the content that they're creating, just saying thank you to them really does make a difference.
Yes, it does. And now, Sofie, please tell us a little bit more about how you came up with your podcast and the title, which is so great.
So it stemmed from a lot of personal struggle. And I think that really personal struggle fuels the creative process. And so I was in a point in my life where I was going through a lot of mental health struggles. I had just gotten out of a very toxic relationship, and I was coping with previous experiences as well that were starting to kind of boil over and come to the surface. And I knew I needed an outlet for what was going on. And so I just started writing things down. I started just to talk to myself and kind of talk out situations and talk out how I'm feeling. And it took about 4 to 5 months to finally feel more like myself again. And I started implementing these small things in my life to make me feel more empowered and to do things that made me happier. And people around me started to pick up on that energy and started to notice, hey, you seem really good lately. Like, how did you do it? And from those conversations, it sparked, hey, why don't I share this with people? Why don't I share how I've been on that road to empowerment and how I'm still on that road to self-empowerment and personal development? And, why don't I bring in some experts who have also been down similar situations? And why don't I bring them in to talk about, specific areas of their life that they have worked to improve on, or maybe it's even what their field is about. I mean, I speak to a lot of career and life coaches on my podcast. And so I knew that's what I wanted my idea to be. I said, okay, the empowerment podcast. Well, the empowerment podcast, there's 500,000 other empowerment podcasts out there called the Empowerment Podcast. And I said, okay, this is not going to work for a name. And then I said, okay, a podcast needs to represent me because it's my baby. It's my passion project. And I was scrolling through previous Instagram posts, and because sometimes I put some decently witty captions in there, and I was like, okay, what can we use? What can we use? And I found a photo in an archive from 2017, 2018. And it was classy, sassy, and a little bit smart assy. And I was like, I don't like the smart assy part, but I do like the classy, sassy. And I've had a couple friends make a joke saying that I am kind of a badass sometimes with things. And so it kind of all clicked together one day. And I said, yeah, classy, sassy, and a bit badassy. That's me in a podcast. And so that's how it's been developing. I think I'm also using it as an archive or a journal or something I can look back on and go, okay, this is where I was at that point in my life. And I can follow along the progress of the podcast and use that to also follow along my own journey to becoming more empowered and to becoming more of myself again. And so that is how Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy, the Empowerment Podcast started.
Wonderful. Always love a good catchy name. People remember it. They really do. And Sofie, any mantras or quotes that help you get through? You're a very busy person. So anything that you go back to over and over again?
I think there's one that I've mentioned a lot in my podcast, and it is, every day we are presented with two choices: evolve or repeat. Evolve. So every day when I wake up in the morning, I choose to do something different every day, to do something that's good for my mental well-being, to do something that's good for my career, to do something that's good for just my own self-care. And so I truly have lived by that. And I've made sure to tell those around me and the people that I love, especially, to try to follow that mantra as well, because I think a lot of the time we get stuck in habits. And I mean, habits are great. They're good for time management, but in terms of personal development and growing as a person, it's very hard to do that when you're doing the same thing every day. You're having the same thing for breakfast. You're taking the same route to work. You're surrounding yourself with the same people who might not actually be good people to have in your life. Maybe you're in a rut at work, or maybe, it's just not inspiring to you anymore. You're not excited to go to work. You're not excited to be in this certain major. You're not excited about all these different things. And I think that coming into tune with that and starting to get in touch with yourself and think about, how does it make me feel when I do this every day? Do I feel good about this? No, I don't. Okay, maybe I should change that. And so making a conscious effort to do something different for yourself every single day, I think is really key to living a life that you're proud of and that you're happy to live.
I love that. And I'm going to remember that quote. And I mean, even, all studies show too, for your brain, when we do the same thing every day, again, like you said, we need those habits for a lot of things, but there's also a lot of aspects of life that we need to shake things up, so to speak. And it's better for our brain, and it keeps us younger, so to speak, and our brain working better and functioning better. And so, yes, thank you so much for highlighting that. And going along with this, because you are so in the thick of the nonprofit world, if someone comes to you, or maybe they already have, and says, I want to make a difference, but I don't know how, I feel overwhelmed, where do I start? Is there any advice you'd give them?
So much. But I think narrowing it down is the best advice I can give. I think we become very overwhelmed with what goes on in the world, and it becomes very easy to be consumed by it, to feel bad for every bad thing that happens, every injustice that happens. And that's something that I've been guilty of. And a lot of people in my sector and peers and people that I'm around, I've seen them go through that as well. And so, first off, it's not our fault for the things that happen in the world. We are not personally responsible for that. First thing. And second, writing down, okay, I want to make a difference, but what is it about what's going on in the world that's making me angry or making me feel passionate or making me feel sad or making me feel like I want to make a difference? And so maybe that is violence against women. And that's something that really gets your blood boiling. And that's, your motivator. And so writing down those things, I think, makes it a whole lot easier to pursue career options, to pursue education options, to even pursue the connections you make and picking people that are involved in that sector, that specific niche, by writing it down. And I mean, it's something that it took me a while to figure out. I was like, oh, I'm so angry about how awful the world is right now. I want to help people. But I was like, there's so many people to help. There's almost 8 billion people to help. I don't know where to start. And so for me, it was education. That was something that really made me angry when I saw that women weren't going to school in some countries, that people weren't going to university because they couldn't afford it, and all these other different factors of education. And so writing that all out, it really solidified. And once you do that, you can go from there. And, don't be afraid to reach out to people, because everyone wants volunteers. Everyone needs a little extra hand. And so reach out to people that reach out on LinkedIn, reach out any way you can, and, see if that's the area that you want to help in, and gain some experience through volunteer work.
Excellent. And I have to second the thing about writing things down. That has been my go-to forever. And it just helps so much, right? Because your brain, it just all starts going in circles in your brain. And to see it on paper, there's a moment. I feel like that happens, right? When you write it all down.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, Sofie, please tell everybody where we can find you and follow you online and find the podcast.
Absolutely. So you can listen to Classy, Sassy, and a Bit Badassy, the empowerment podcast. You can listen from our website. It is classysassybadassy.com. All of the links to different streaming platforms are on there, as well as you can listen online on our website. You can follow our Instagram and Facebook at CSBB Podcast. Those are my social media handles and website. And I hope it helps anyone who's listening to this podcast right now. I hope that you can take away a little bit of empowerment from it.
Sofie, you are wise beyond your years.
And thank you.
Thank you for all the good that you are doing and that I know you're going to continue to do, because this is just the start, and that is a wonderful thing. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Hey listeners, wanted to hop on here and give you a real quick update. Since recording this episode of the podcast, Sofie has actually updated the name of her show to Claim Your Potential, the Empowerment Podcast. So while it is referred to by its old name here, know that it is now Claim Your Potential, claimyourpotential.com. Thanks so much for listening to Be the Good with Kate Chericello. Whether you're listening on YouTube or via podcast, it would mean the world if you liked, subscribed, and or left a review. You heard about the good? Now go out and be the good in your life this week. If you have stories of good news that need to be shared, please send me a message. Thanks again, and have a great week.